Nora Daniels was crying in the middle of Gate C-17 when her phone finally died, right as she was begging the airline attendant to rebook her on another flight. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the attendant said, not even looking up anymore. "All flights to New York are canceled until tomorrow afternoon." "I have to be there tonight," Nora said, panic rising in her throat. She was running on 2 hours of sleep, stale airport coffee, and desperation. "My sister's getting married tomorrow morning." "I promised I'd be there." The woman gave her a look that said, "That's not my problem," and turned to the next person in line. Nora's bag was digging into her shoulder, her heels were giving her blisters, and her mascara was smudged. She blinked back tears and stepped away from the counter, trying not to fall apart in the middle of the terminal. She looked around the crowded airport, people bustling past her, all headed somewhere, and she was stuck. "Excuse me," a deep voice said behind her. "Did I just hear you say you need to get to New York tonight?" She turned around, confused, and came face to face with a man in a dark navy cashmere coat, tall, sharp-jawed, with thick, slightly tousled brown hair and eyes like storm clouds gray, and watching her closely. "What?" she said, caught off guard. "I have a jet leaving in 15 minutes. It's headed to D.C., but I can reroute it to New York if you need a ride." She blinked. "You're joking." The man pulled out a sleek black wallet and flashed an ID that read Bennett Langston. He didn't look like the kind of guy who joked. "I'm not. You looked like you needed help." Nora hesitated. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Bennett tilted his head. "Why not? Because people don't just offer their private jets to women crying at airport gates." He smiled just a little and said, "Well, maybe you've been meeting the wrong men." Before she could respond, a man in a black suit approached him. "Mr. Langston, the plane is ready." Bennett glanced at Nora. "You coming or not, miss?" "Daniels, Nora Daniels." He held out a hand. "Nice to meet you, Nora. Let's get you to that wedding." She stared at his hand for a second. Then, against every sensible thought in her head, she took it. The private terminal was quiet and sleek, a complete contrast to the chaos she'd just left behind. Within 10 minutes, she was seated in a cream leather chair inside the most luxurious plane she'd ever seen. Everything smelled like cedarwood and money. "Are you a movie star or something?" she asked as she buckled in, still a little dazed. He laughed, settling into the seat across from her. "No, I own a tech company, Langston Dynamics." Nora squinted. "Wait, that's the one with the Smart City project in Chicago." He lifted a brow. "You follow urban development." "I'm an architect," she said, then bit the inside of her cheek. "Well, I was until I got laid off 3 weeks ago." He nodded like that explained everything. "So you're a stranded architect on your way to her sister's wedding, and I'm a guy with a jet and nowhere to be for the next few hours." She narrowed her eyes. "You don't know anything about me?" "No," he said slowly, "but I'm interested in finding out." They talked for most of the flight. It started out awkward, her trying to keep her guard up, him surprisingly easy to talk to. He asked about her work, her favorite buildings in the world, the last thing that made her laugh. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, she forgot she was talking to a man who had a private chef on board. "So what about you?" she asked. "You always reroute your private plane for crying women." Bennett leaned back in his seat, watching her. "No, just one." She felt her stomach flip when they landed. It was nearly midnight. A black car was already waiting on the tarmac. He stepped out first, then offered her his hand again. "I can drop you at your hotel," he said as she climbed into the back seat. She glanced over at him, overwhelmed. "Thank you. I don't even know how to repay you." "Maybe you'll have dinner with me after the wedding." She froze. "You're asking me out?" "Yeah," he said, voice low. "I rerouted my jet for you. I think I've earned dinner." She looked at him, this stranger who felt less like a stranger than he should. "All right. Dinner," he smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "It's a date." The car dropped her at the hotel. As she stepped out, she turned and said, "Bennett?" "Yeah, I never expected any of this when I woke up this morning." He held her gaze. "Me neither." Then she was gone. The next morning, Nora stood by her sister's side in a pale blue dress and heels that still pinched, but she couldn't stop smiling. And later that night, when she walked into the rooftop restaurant Bennett had chosen complete with candlelight, jazz music, and a view of the city's skyline. He was already standing by the table, waiting. He looked up, and when he saw her, he didn't look away. "Wow," he said quietly. "You came," she smiled. "You rerouted a jet. I figured the least I could do was show up." He stepped closer, eyes warm. "I'm glad you did." So was she. The scent of grilled rosemary lamb drifted through the open terrace doors as Bennett poured a ruby stream of wine into Nora's glass. The skyline glittered behind him, but she barely noticed, not when he was looking at her like she was the only person in the city worth seeing. "So," she said, setting her glass down, "tell me something no one else knows about you." He leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on the edge of the white linen-covered table. "I have a fear of elevators," she blinked. I avoid them whenever I can. I'll take the stairs even if it's 20 floors. You say that like you don't live in a penthouse?" "I do," he replied. "Top floor, but there's a staircase hidden behind the wine cellar, not exactly public knowledge." She tilted her head. "That's oddly charming. You asked for something no one knows." He paused for a beat. "Your turn," she exhaled, twisting the stem of her glass. "I used to design model cities out of cereal boxes, entire skylines on my bedroom floor. My mom thought I'd become a sculptor." "Why didn't you?" "I wanted the real thing. Steel, concrete, glass, not cardboard." He smiled faintly, but there was something thoughtful in his expression. "You like building things that last." "I guess I do." The waiter brought their entrees. Her sea base was plated like a work of art, his steak glistening with just the right sear. For a while, they ate in companionable silence, the kind that didn't feel awkward or strained. Bennett was the one to break it. "I haven't seen you check your phone once." "I left it in my room," she said. "Figured if I was going to have dinner with a stranger who saved my weekend, I should at least be present." "Do I still count as a stranger?" "Definitely." "You could be a serial killer with impeccable taste in wine," he laughed. "If I were, I wouldn't be wasting time on candlelit dinners." "That's both comforting and mildly terrifying." He raised his glass. "To transparency." She clinked hers to his. "And highly suspicious good fortune." Their laughter faded into the ambient jazz floating from the speakers. Bennett's gaze flicked to her hands, then back to her face. "You've been fidgeting with that ring on your right hand. Habit or something more?" She glanced down, surprised. "It was my grandmother's. She was the first woman in our family to graduate college. She wore it every day until she passed. She must have meant a lot to you. She was the one who told me to stop playing small. Whenever I was scared to pitch an idea or apply for something big, she'd remind me that fear was just a sign I was stretching." Bennett nodded slowly. "Sounds like someone I would have liked. You two might have competed over who made the better risotto." "I'd win," he said without hesitation. "Confident, just accurate." She laughed again, softer this time. "You surprise me." "How so?" "I expected you to be colder, all polished edges and business jargon. You run a company that's constantly in the headlines. People call you ruthless. They also called Einstein insane. Are you comparing yourself to Einstein? Not unless it's working." She rolled her eyes, but her smile said she didn't mind, not at all. After dessert, when they stepped into the elevator that led down to the lobby, she raised an eyebrow. "Thought you avoided these." His hand hovered near the panel, then dropped. "I do. But I figured I'd make an exception. For me, for the woman who built cities out of cereal boxes," he said quietly. The elevator hummed as it descended. She watched the numbers tick down, but the air between them grew heavier with something unspoken. Outside, the car was already waiting, the driver standing by with the door open, but Bennett didn't move right away. "I want to see you again," he said. She hesitated, the cool breeze catching her hair. "I'm flying back to Chicago in 2 days. Then I'll come to Chicago." She blinked. "You'd fly to Chicago just for me?" "I rerouted a jet for you, remember?" She shook her head, overwhelmed in the best kind of way. "What even is your life?" He stepped closer. "It's been predictable until you." She looked up at him, her heart beating a little too fast. "You barely know me." "Then let me fix that." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "This is crazy, I know. And I think I want to see where it goes anyway." His hand brushed hers just enough to make her feel it. "Good." As she slipped into the car, he closed the door behind her, his fingers lingering on the frame for half a second longer than necessary. As the vehicle pulled away, she looked back once. He was still standing there, watching her disappear into the night. Nora pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Chicago gallery, blinking against the sudden flood of daylight and murmured voices. The space was wide and whitewashed, filled with steel sculptures and suspended wooden installations, the kind of work that made you tilt your head and question your own imagination. "You weren't kidding when you said you liked buildings," Bennett said behind her, his voice low and amused. She glanced over her shoulder. "I like the bones of things, the way tension can hold weight. Same rules apply in both architecture and art." He raised an eyebrow. "You brought me to an art exhibit about tension? I thought you'd appreciate the metaphor." Direct hit. A week had passed since New York, and Bennett had shown up in Chicago 2 days later without warning, claiming he had a meeting downtown, but Nora hadn't seen a single briefcase. Today, she'd offered to show him something she loved. He hadn't hesitated. They moved through the gallery slowly, the low hum of other visitors fading as they settled into a rhythm. She pointed out pieces that used reclaimed materials, installations that played with shadow. He listened with a quiet intensity that surprised her, asking questions that made her feel like he actually cared about the answers. At one particularly jagged metal piece, he folded his arms and asked, "Do you ever miss it?" She knew what he meant. "Every day." "Then why haven't you found something new?" "I've been trying," she admitted. "But layoffs mess with your confidence. It's hard to walk back into the room like you belong there when someone's already decided you don't." He was quiet for a moment. "There's a pitch happening next week. Langston Dynamics is considering a new office in Chicago. We're reviewing designs." She turned to him slowly. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance if you want it." Her chest tightened. "That's a conflict of interest. We're not in a relationship, not yet." His eyes didn't flinch. "No, not yet." The air between them shifted. She took a step back, needing the space to think, to breathe. "I don't want anything handed to me. Then earn it." His voice was steady, not patronizing. "Submit anonymously. No one will know it's yours. I'll recuse myself from the selection. You get a fair shot, that's all." She stared at him, trying to read between the lines. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I want to see what you can build when no one's telling you no." A beat passed. Then she nodded once. "All right." Later, they walked along the riverfront, the sun dipping low behind the skyline. A street musician played something soft and bluesy, and Bennett paused at her railing, looking out over the water. "My father used to bring me to places like this," he said suddenly. "Before he died." She turned to him, surprised. "You never mentioned your family." "There's not much to say. My mother left when I was 12. My dad raised me until I was old enough to think I didn't need anyone. Then he got sick. By the time I figured out how wrong I was, he was gone." "I'm sorry," he shook his head. "I built Langston Dynamics in his garage. He never saw what it became. I think that's why I push so hard. It's not just about the company, it's about proving to myself that I can make something permanent." "You already have." His jaw shifted. "It doesn't feel that way." She stepped closer, placing her hand on the cold metal railing. "Maybe permanence isn't about the things we build. Maybe it's about who we choose to build them with." His gaze found hers, and she saw the shift the moment something cracked behind his carefully composed exterior. "I don't let people in easily," he said. "I noticed, but I want to let you in." She didn't answer with words. She leaned in slowly until her lips brushed his, tentative at first, then more certain. His hand found her waist, grounding her. The city buzzed around them, but in that moment it was just them. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "This is terrifying." "I know," he said, "but I don't want to go back to the way things were before you." She smiled. "Neither do I." That night he walked her to her apartment door, still dressed in cashmere and cologne, but somehow more real than he had ever seemed before. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night, Nora." He didn't kiss her again. He just watched her go, as if memorizing the way she stepped into the building, the way she glanced back just once before the door closed. Inside, she leaned against the wall and exhaled. Some men reroute flights, others reroute lives. Rain tapped gently against the glass walls of the Langston Dynamics Conference suite as Nora stood in front of a panel of executives, her jaw tight, palms steady. Her anonymous submission had earned her a place in the final round of pitches for the new Chicago headquarters. And now she was here alone, under her own name, presenting her vision for a building that breathed with light and airflow, not just function. She didn't look at Bennett, seated silently at the far corner of the room, hands clasped under his chin. He hadn't said a word as she walked in. He wouldn't. He'd made it clear this was her moment, and he wouldn't influence it. No glances, no encouragement, just quiet faith. "This design isn't about dominance," she said, clicking to the final slide. "It's about integration, respecting the skyline while reflecting the future. It invites the city in, not just towers over it." There was a beat of silence before the lead executive leaned back, brows raised, and said, "Thank you, Miss Daniels. We'll be in touch." Outside the room, her legs felt like water. She sat on a bench outside the elevators, trying to breathe, to stop second-guessing every word she'd just said. "I've never seen them that quiet after a pitch," Bennett said, appearing beside her with his jacket draped over one arm. She didn't look up. "That's either great or terrible." "They were listening," he said. "They don't do that unless it matters." Nora finally met his eyes. "What if I don't get it? Then we build something else." She stared at him for a long moment. "You mean that, don't you?" "I've never been more certain of anything." His voice was low, serious in a way that made her chest pull tight. "I thought I knew what my life was supposed to look like, but that was before you." He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "I used to think ambition was the only thing I'd ever need, that building something massive would make me feel whole, but none of it ever filled the space." He paused, then added, "You did." Her throat tightened. "What are you saying?" "I rerouted my jet for a stranger." "But I would reroute my entire life for you." The elevator chimed behind them, but neither moved. "I never expected you," she said softly. "I wasn't looking for any of this." He smiled, but it wasn't casual. It was full of gravity. "Neither was I. But here we are." That night, he met her outside her apartment again, but this time he didn't wait for her to invite him in. He took her hand and placed something small and square into her palm. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a simple black velvet box. But instead of a ring, there was a tiny brass key. "It's for the lake house outside Geneva," he said. "There's a garden view you'd love, and a drafting room I just had redone." She stared at it. "You're giving me a house." "I'm giving you a place to build," he said, voice steady. "With me." "If you want that." The words felt surreal, but he didn't rush her. He just stood there, waiting. She looked up at him, her heart thudding so loudly it drowned out the city. "I thought you were just a guy with a jet," she whispered. "I'm a man who fell in love with a woman who builds cathedrals out of possibility." She stepped forward, wrapping her fingers around the key. "Then you should know I don't build temporary things. I'm counting on it." The kiss that followed wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was everything they hadn't said, everything they had. A decision sealed not with a promise, but with the quiet certainty between two people who had found their home in each other. A week later, the firm called. She'd won the pitch. The groundbreaking happened on a warm spring morning, with sunlight glinting off steel beams and camera shutters clicking behind them. Her design would rise above the city, elegant, functional, unmistakably hers. But the real celebration came that night, at a private dinner for two on the rooftop of the half-finished building. The chef plated each course in silence while string lights danced above them. The wind carried the scent of fresh concrete and jasmine from a nearby planter. "I have one more question," she said as they finished dessert. "Only one," he teased. "Why me?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you didn't ask for anything. You just kept showing up with your whole heart." She looked around at the skyline. "I never thought I'd fall for someone like you." He reached across the table and laced their fingers together. "And I never thought I'd stop chasing the next big thing until I realized it was you." They married 6 months later in a quiet ceremony at his lake house, under an arch of steel and wildflowers, surrounded by the people who mattered most. There were no headlines, no press releases. Just a man and a woman who had crossed paths at a gate neither of them expected and rerouted into a future they built together. Nora stood at the edge of the glass-paneled balcony, wind weaving through her hair as the city stretched beneath her in all directions. From this height, the streets looked like arteries of light, pulsing with life. Her custom wedding gown trailed behind her in soft waves of silk, and her bare shoulders glowed in the low amber of the rooftop reception lights. The breeze carried the faint scent of orange blossom and white peonies from the floral arrangements circling the terrace, and laughter echoed from the tables behind her. Bennett appeared beside her with 2 glasses of champagne, one of which he handed her silently. He changed into a midnight blue tuxedo jacket. For the evening, the standard black had never quite suited him. His tie was undone, and his hair was slightly askew from the way she'd run her hands through it during their first dance. "You disappeared on me," he said, his voice quieter than the music drifting behind them. "I needed a second," she said, still watching the skyline. "It feels like the world turned inside out, and somehow this is where I landed." He followed her gaze. "Do you regret where you landed?" "No," she said without hesitation. "I just keep wondering how I ended up with someone who sees through every defense I've ever built. You never needed them with me." She took a sip of champagne, then turned to look at him. "You told me once you avoided elevators. You never said why." He leaned against the railing, his expression unreadable for a moment. "My father collapsed in one. I was with him. I was just a kid and I couldn't do anything." Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Bennett. I didn't tell you before because I didn't want you to see me as broken." "I don't," she said softly. "I see you as someone who kept walking into every room without flinching, even when it scared him." He looked at her then, and there was something raw in his eyes, something unguarded. "You're the only place I've ever felt safe." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Then you'll never have to feel unsafe again." The music shifted into something slower. A few couples had started dancing again under the canopy of string lights. Bennett didn't ask, he just pulled her gently toward him, her glass forgotten on the railing as she fit against him like she had always belonged there. They swayed silently, the soft rustle of her dress brushing against his shoes. He rested his chin lightly on her head. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" he asked. "You offered me a ride on your jet." "No," he murmured. "Before that, I asked if you needed help." She tilted her head back to look at him. "And I did, just not the kind I thought." "I think we both needed saving," he said. "We just didn't realize it would look like this." The wind picked up slightly, and her veil fluttered behind her like a whisper. She leaned in closer, her cheek pressed against his chest. "I don't want anything else," she said quietly. "No more chasing, no more second-guessing, just this." "Just us?" "I already promised you that," he said, "but I'll promise it again, every day if you need me to." She smiled and closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath his shirt. The music faded into applause as guests clapped for one of the couples on the dance floor, but neither of them let go. Later that night, when the last guest had left and the rooftop had quieted, Bennett led her down the private stairwell to the floor below. The entire top level of the new Langston Dynamics headquarters had been converted into a private penthouse, their new home. He opened the door and stepped aside, letting her walk in first. The space was warm and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows, soft golden lighting, and furniture in deep earth tones. A fireplace flickered in the far wall, and a commissioned art piece made entirely of salvaged steel beams and glass from historic Chicago buildings hung above it. She turned in slow circles, taking it in. "You did all this? I wanted you to have a place that felt like both of us," he said. "Built from the pieces we've collected along the way." She crossed the room and ran her fingers along the edge of the drafting table tucked into the corner near the windows. Her sketchbook was already there, along with a box of pencils and a fresh roll of tracing paper. "I thought we'd start designing something new," he said. "Together." She kissed him then, hard and certain, and when she finally pulled back, her voice was full of promise. "Let's build forever." Months passed, and the city shifted into summer. The headquarters opened in full, its striking design earning praise from every major architectural journal in the country. Nora's firm, newly founded and already growing, was commissioned for 3 more commercial projects. She worked from their penthouse office, barefoot most days, her sketches spread across the table, Bennett occasionally interrupting her with coffee and unsolicited opinions on glass paneling. They traveled when they wanted to, escaping to the lake house or flying to Portugal for wine tastings and cliff walks. There were no more secret flights or chance encounters, only plans made with intention, days filled with laughter, and nights spent tangled in warm sheets and quiet conversations. One morning, as they sat on the balcony with coffee and the Tribune folded between them, Nora set down her mug and looked at him. "I had a dream last night," she said, "about a baby. It had your eyes and my stubbornness." He lowered his newspaper. "That sounds dangerously adorable," she laughed. "I think I'm ready." He studied her, then set the paper aside. "Then so am I." She reached for his hand across the table. "You were always the plan, I just didn't know it yet." He kissed her knuckles, then stood and pulled her into his arms. "Let's start the next draft." And just like that, they began again, 2 people who had once collided in the unlikeliest of places, now building a life not made of steel or glass, but of quiet moments, shared dreams, and a love that had rewritten everything.